Few individuals in the world have challenged the boundaries of science as profoundly as Stephen Hawking, and seldom has anything so unexpected been heard from him as what you're about to discover. For decades, Hawking was a symbol of logical, skeptical, and rational thought. However, what many don't know is that he participated in an unapproved, little-publicized conversation in which he directly addressed the possibility of consciousness continuing after death. This interview, considered by some as forbidden, was kept away from the general public for reasons that are still debated. For many seniors, it represents something deeper than a theory, a moment of clarity that redefines life and its ending. What he said may not only surprise you, but also change the way you perceive what happens after our last breath. Prepare to hear words that don't fit the stereotype that was created around him. And perhaps, after this, you'll never think the same way again. It's understandable that many older folks prefer not to broach this subject. Death is something that often brings discomfort, but ignoring this part of life also deprives us of understanding something essential. What Hawking revealed, even in a restrained manner, can be an invitation to look at existence with greater depth. In this video, you'll be guided through arguments and reflections that blend science, philosophy, and humanity. We're not talking about beliefs, but about possibilities that, coming from someone like him, carry different weight. And if you believe that age is a time to silence doubts, perhaps this is the right time to listen to them more carefully. If this content resonates with you, consider subscribing to the channel and giving it a thumbs up. This helps us continue producing reflections that respect the intelligence and sensitivity of those who have lived long lives. Throughout much of his career, Hawking avoided spiritual themes. In public, he said that consciousness was a product of the brain and that there was nothing beyond the body. However, in more private conversations, his discourse seemed to gain other layers. According to a researcher who lived with him in his final years, there were moments when Hawking demonstrated fascination with accounts of near-death experiences. Not because he blindly believed in them, but because he recognized patterns that were too intriguing to be ignored. In one of these conversations, he reportedly said that death may not be the end, but merely a transition to a different form of existence, not yet understood by science. The phrase was recorded by an assistant but never officially published. Many consider this statement just speculative thinking. Others see there a sign that even the most skeptical scientists feel the presence of something greater as they approach the end. Hawking lived for over 50 years with a disease that, according to doctors, would take him in just a few years. He had time to reflect on death like few others. This personal experience may have shaped his view more intimately than his scientific speeches revealed. In an interview with the BBC, he even stated that the brain is like a computer, and when it stops, everything is erased. But behind the scenes, there were more nuances. There were pauses, doubts, questions that he couldn't answer with mathematical formulas. And it is in this space of uncertainty that this story stands. What makes this interview so impactful is not only the content, but the context. The location where it took place, the way it was conducted, and especially the way it was omitted from the public for so long. The conversation reportedly took place in 2015 during an informal meeting between scientists and independent thinkers. The audio was never officially released, but excerpts were transcribed by one of those present. In these statements, Hawking doesn't position himself as a believer, but as someone open to recognizing that perhaps, just perhaps, something escapes our current understanding. He mentions the possibility of consciousness existing on levels that we don't yet know how to measure, and that the accounts of people who returned after being clinically dead should be taken more seriously. This openness wasn't well received by everyone. Some colleagues criticized him for giving space to ideas they considered pseudoscience. Others defended him, saying that questioning doesn't mean believing, but rather seeking to better understand what is around us. For older audiences who carry an extensive life baggage, this type of reflection can have a special value. After all, when you live so long, what matters most are the questions that still remain. And the oldest of them continues to be, what happens after death? The answer, perhaps, is in listening more with the heart than with formulas. And in this video, you'll have the chance to do just that. In the eyes of traditional science, Consciousness is a biological function that ends along with brain activity. However, over the years, serious research has emerged investigating cases of cardiac arrest in which patients reported lucid, out-of-body experiences. Hawking, although he never publicly confirmed a change of position, demonstrated growing interest in these phenomena in the last years of his life. According to a source close to him, he discreetly followed studies on altered states of consciousness conducted by renowned universities, not out of mysticism, but because these accounts escaped simple explanation. For him, a scientist of tough formation, admitting this interest was risky. But the silence he maintained publicly may have been a form of respect for his own internal process. After all, not everything needs to be said to be true. In one of the excerpts from the leaked interview, he reportedly made a curious observation. When asked if he believed in life after death, he replied that not in the way religions describe, but that consciousness may be more complex than we think. He also said that death may represent a change of state, and that certain elements of the human experience may persist, even without the physical support of the body. This idea didn't come from a belief, but from a sincere doubt, and that is precisely where its strength lies. Hawking wasn't selling a truth, but opening space to think the unthinkable. For an older audience who may be dealing with recent losses or facing their own limitations, this type of openness is valuable. It offers a perspective that doesn't impose but invites. It's important to remember that this isn't a spiritualist defense coming from a scientist. Hawking didn't convert or defend doctrines. What he did in this confidential conversation was admit that there are gaps in current explanations. Gaps that may hide something bigger. He compared consciousness to a radio signal. Even when the device breaks down, the signal may continue to exist, invisible, until it is captured again. This metaphor wasn't well accepted among his peers. Many classified it as an unnecessary philosophical concession. But for those who listen carefully, there is a turning point there. It is the moment when one of the greatest names in modern science admits that perhaps at the end of it all there is more than silence. This content, because it's considered outside the scientific standard, has never been published in academic journals. The recording, until today, remains guarded by a restricted group that claims to want to preserve Hawking's legacy away from controversies. However, excerpts of the conversation circulated through forums and private groups, generating heated debates among scholars and curious people. For many seniors who heard these excerpts, Hawking's speech sounded like an unexpected comfort, not for bringing certainty, but for validating a possibility. At an age when so many truths have already been revised, perhaps what matters most is exactly this: being able to imagine that the end isn't so definitive after all. Some institutions have tried to deny the existence of this interview, claiming that everything was just an invention. But people present at that meeting insist that the dialogue happened and that the content was suppressed for fear of affecting Hawking's public image. Whether this is true or not, it may never be proven with accuracy. The fact is that this content has spread and touched many people, especially those who have already lost loved ones or who are preparing, consciously or not, for their own departure. The idea that consciousness may survive death, even coming as a doubt, transforms the way we live the last years. Stephen Hawking was always seen as a mind that sought to understand the universe from reason. But in this conversation, he demonstrated something rare: vulnerability. By admitting that he didn't have all the answers, he opened space for others to also ask themselves without fear. Perhaps this is the true legacy of this interview. More than offering explanations, it offers permission. Permission to doubt, to reflect, to imagine that, even in the face of the end, there is still something to be lived in another form. And this, for those who live with the proximity of finitude, can be more valuable than any scientific certainty. The repercussions of this interview intensified among circles of palliative care doctors and elder care providers. Many reported that terminally ill patients, upon hearing the excerpts attributed to Hawking, showed relief and renewed curiosity. It wasn't about religious conversion, but about broadening horizons. When a respected scientist suggests that consciousness may not be extinguished with death, it has a different impact. It's not faith, it's consideration. And for those nearing the end, these considerations become bridges between fear and serenity. That's why this video is so necessary. Because it's not about convincing, but about sharing what can inspire a new way of facing the inevitable. When death ceases to be a full stop and becomes a comma, life also changes its meaning. Other scholars in the field of quantum physics also began to speak out behind the scenes, reflecting on Hawking's words. Although most maintain the formal discourse that consciousness arises from the brain and disappears with it, there is a growing group who prefer not to close the debate. For them, the fact that some experiences transcend current logic is reason enough to continue exploring. In this sense, the interview attributed to Hawking acts as a spark. It doesn't affirm, but instigates. It doesn't conclude, but initiates. And this movement, when it reaches the ears of those who have more questions than time, is powerful. It allows the end of life to be not just the closing of a cycle, but perhaps the beginning of a new enigma. And even if nothing is proven, thinking about it can bring peace. In the midst of all this, there's a question that stands out. Why was this conversation hidden for so long? Perhaps because admitting doubts is seen as weakness in a world obsessed with answers. Or perhaps because Hawking, even brilliant, was human like any of us. And like any human being, he had moments when he realized that the universe doesn't fit entirely into equations. This perception doesn't diminish his genius. On the contrary, it humanizes it. It makes it accessible. And it allows ordinary people like you watching us now to feel authorized to reflect on what comes next, without shame or fear of seeming naive. This interview, more than controversial, is a mirror. It reflects what many think, but don't dare to say. It's natural for some to dismiss everything as a rumor. After all, there's no public recording, no official publication, but the absence of evidence doesn't mean absence of truth. Many of the great advances in science began with observations that seemed absurd, and even if this content is never officially validated, its emotional and philosophical impact is already undeniable. What matters in the end is what it awakens in those who listen. If it provokes fear, it's because it touches a sensitive point. If it provokes hope, it's because it ignites something that was dormant. And if it provokes reflection, then it has already fulfilled its role. No one comes out the same after hearing that even Stephen Hawking, in silence, thought about the possibility of the soul's continuity. This video doesn't intend to convince you of anything. Our goal is just to share a perspective that may resonate with your own experiences and questions. In a world full of ready-made answers, having the courage to ask questions is a rare act. Hawking, even in his last years, maintained this courage. And if he, with all his intelligence, allowed himself to think about what lies beyond, perhaps we can too. Age teaches us that not everything needs to be resolved. Some things just need to be felt. And the idea of consciousness continuing, even without guarantees, can be one of those sensations that calm the spirit, especially when the moment of saying goodbye approaches. Therefore, this content is especially directed to you who have already lived so much, who have already seen the world change, who have already loved, lost, built, and reinvented yourself. You who may be facing the fear of departure, or who have already said goodbye to loved ones. This video is an invitation to look beyond the apparent, to accept that even the greatest names in science had their doubts, and that these doubts don't weaken us. On the contrary, they make us more human. If Hawking's speech touched something inside you, stay with us until the end. There's still more to be said, and each word here was chosen with the care that should be taken when speaking of what none of us can avoid. Many seniors report that when hearing stories like this, they feel a kind of reconciliation with time. It's not about seeking easy comfort, but about understanding that even the end can contain a form of continuity. When a scientist of Hawking's caliber admits the possibility that we still don't understand everything about consciousness, this doesn't invalidate science, but expands its frontier. Science shouldn't be a wall, but a bridge. And it was in this direction that he seems to have walked in his last years. Questioning what comes after life is not weakness, it's maturity. Doubt can be a sign of wisdom, not ignorance. Accepting that we don't have all the answers may be the greatest advance of all. And for those who have faced so many challenges throughout life, this humility before the mystery may be the most liberating thing of all. There's no way to say with complete certainty what Hawking really believed in his final days. But the information gathered points to a subtle yet significant change. The man who once said that everything ended with death began to admit that perhaps it wasn't that simple. This change of posture may have come from living with his own end, from contact with people who had transformative experiences, or simply from the courage to look at the unknown without needing to dominate it. This doesn't make him a believer, but a free thinker. And perhaps that's the most important lesson. We can keep questioning even when everyone expects us to have already concluded our ideas. The freedom to think never gets old. At the end of his journey, Hawking left a powerful message even without formally writing it. He showed that the human mind can be gigantic, even when the body no longer responds, that curiosity can persist, even in the face of death, and that no one, however rational, is immune to the impact of the great questions of existence. His possible change of view on consciousness doesn't diminish him as a scientist. On the contrary, it brings him closer to all of us. Because in the end, we are all made of the same questions. And what he left, even in silence, is an invitation to reflect with more courage, especially for those who feel that time is running out. If you've made it this far, it's because some part of this story touched you. Perhaps because in silence you also wonder what comes next. Perhaps because you feel that there is still something to be understood before leaving. Knowing that even the greatest names in science also lived these anxieties can be a relief, and also a stimulus. This video doesn't bring ready-made answers, but shares a fragment of reflection that can be precious, that can transform the way we face the idea of the end, that can bring calm. Because deep down what we all want is this, to depart in peace, knowing that our questions remain alive. Life is made of cycles, and old age is one of the most intense and profound. It is in it that we revisit memories, that we forgive, that we understand more clearly the value of time. And it is also in it that we most feel the proximity of the mystery. Therefore, topics like this should be treated with respect, but also with courage. Hawking's interview, even being an unofficial record, helps us understand that we are not alone in these doubts, and that everything we don't yet know can be as valuable as what we have already learned. Living is an act of continuous discovery, and dying perhaps is not the end of this journey, but the beginning of another that we have not yet managed to describe. If this content has brought a new perspective or awakened some important reflection in you, consider sharing it with someone who may benefit from this message. Sometimes a simple conversation can relieve a tired heart. And if you want to continue receiving videos that respect your story, your intelligence, and your sensitivity, subscribe to the channel. Here, you won't find easy answers, but you will find questions that deserve to be asked. Because what makes us human is not having certainties, but having the courage to seek. And as long as there is doubt, there will also be the possibility of hope. Thank you very much for being with us until the end of this video.